All right, welcome back to Mr. Saucedo's YouTube videos, everybody. This is lesson 7. It's how does isolation lead to new species? And so there are going to be some cutouts. So what I want you to do is I want you to cut out the terms and also cut out the definitions and see if you can match them before we actually put them together. In addition, you're going to be coloring in the pictures that you see. So the first 3 that I want you to try to find are biological species, speciation, and reproductive isolation. Again, you're going to cut them all out anyway, shuffle them around before you start pasting them down. Remember that you want to make sure that they're correct, so don't start pasting them too soon. Let's start with biological species. So it's just a group of organisms that can interbreed and produce fertile offspring. Fertile means that they're able to reproduce. Interbreed just means, again, that they're able to reproduce with one another. Okay? Speciation, process of forming a new and distinct species. This should say distinct, not district. Reproductive isolation. That is a type of isolation where different populations can no longer reproduce with one another. An example of that would be we have different species of fruit flies. They're no longer able to reproduce with one another. Reproductive isolation is one of the types of isolation that we're going to be giving examples of and talking about. Okay, like reproductive isolation is like once you get to that point, you're definitely like a different species in most biologists' eyes at that point because you can no longer reproduce. So even if you look very similar, like fruit flies all look kind of similar, they're definitely different because they can no longer produce fertile offspring. They can no longer interbreed. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the different types of isolation. So, geographic isolation. It's a type of isolation where a physical barrier divides populations. And this can be mountains, it can be rivers, it can be canyons, it can be a desert separates you now. It can be ice, it can be any physical barrier that is now separating 2 groups from one another. Good examples of that: the northern spotted owl and the Mexican spotted owl. In between here and here, so this is California. I hope you know that's California. This is Arizona, Nevada, Utah, Mexico. In between here and here, the Pacific Northwest and here, there are mountains, there are deserts, and you might think to yourself, why don't they just fly? Well, some birds are not necessarily going to migrate. So they are different enough, even though they look similar, they are different enough geographically that they're not able to reproduce with one another. Okay, another good one. Here we have 2 different types of porkfish. Now, the Isthmus of Panama, so that would be this little bridge that connects North America to South America. That little bridge pretty much popped up 3.5 million years ago. And so for 3.5 million years, there is a species of porkfish on the eastern side and on the western side of this little isthmus, and they can no longer reproduce with one another because of that isthmus. And so because of that land bridge, they're no longer able to reproduce with one another. So for 3.5 billion or million, sorry, for 3.5 million years, they've been isolated from one another and can no longer reproduce. Temporal isolation. So temporal means time. It's where timing prevents reproduction. So it can be different seasons, wet versus dry. It can be day versus night. It can be fall versus summer. There's a lot of different organisms that reproduce at certain times of the year. And so because of that, they're not able to mate. Even though they're very closely related, they're unable to mate with one another because of these things. So a good example of that, we have the spring-field cricket. They reproduce in the spring. The fall-field cricket, they reproduce in the fall. Even though they look almost exactly the same, they are unable to reproduce with one another because legitimately they just are not even alive at the exact same time. So they're unable to reproduce with one another. Here we have 2 frogs. This one breeds in late March to May. This one breeds January to March. So even though they are related to one another, they're both frogs, they're unable to reproduce with one another because of just their breeding seasons. Like their internal clock doesn't allow them to lay their eggs and fertilize with sperm. They just can't do that. Here you have the eastern spotted skunk and the western spotted skunk. One of these skunks is awake during the day. One of these skunks is awake at night. So they are never awake at the exact same time, which means they're unable to reproduce with one another. Behavioral isolation. Isolation where differences in courtship rituals. If you don't know what that means, some birds, we showed it before, like a clip of it, but like they do dances or something in order to get attention, right, from different females of their species. Mating behaviors prevent reproduction. This can be dances, the sounds that they make, the scents that they release. And so a good example of that, we have the green-eyed tree frog. Depending on where you are in Australia, these different parts, each of these frogs, even though they're green-eyed tree frogs, but each of the different frogs that live in these different areas make different sounds. And so because they make different sounds, their mating sounds are completely different. So if you are in the south here and you're making this kind of trill or this kind of ribbiting noise, that is all that these frogs are going to understand as, okay, you want to mate. Whereas if these frogs were put in a different location, the mating sounds are completely different. And so they're not going to be able to communicate with one another. Again, the eastern and western meadowlark, they use completely different songs to attract mates. So behaviorally, they're unable to reproduce with one another. Mechanical isolation. So it is a type of isolation where literally the genitalia, the male and female little parts of them, are no longer compatible for fertilization. So it could be something as small as just the sperm can no longer fertilize the egg. Like, we're pretty, similar to chimpanzees. But if you tried to fertilize a human's egg with sperm from a chimpanzee, it just doesn't work. Like mechanical isolation, the mechanical isolation of it is impossible. The chemicals do not stimulate the fertilization process. And so here's a good one where you have damselflies, which have these crazy anatomical body shapes. There are certain species of them that are just physically incapable of bending their bodies the way that they need to reproduce. All right, that was it. So again, if you have any questions, please let me know.